If you enjoy history told from the inside out, you've found the right place. Welcome to another POV. Consider subscribing if you'd like to stay. The smell reaches you before anything else. It is not the smell of blood, not yet, that comes later, in another life, on another morning entirely. What greets you first, before your eyes have fully opened, is the smell of damp stone and straw, the faint sourness of men sleeping close together, breath upon breath in the narrow air. Somewhere near the far wall, a man is coughing, the slow rhythmic kind that has gone on so long it no longer wakes anyone. You have learned to sleep through it the way you once learned to sleep through storms. You lie still for a moment, not from comfort, but from habit. The body learns to hold on to these few seconds, the grey half-light, before the day makes its demands, because once you rise, the day does not give them back. The cell is small. That is the word the Romans might use, and it is accurate without being wrong. Cell. Stone walls, a wooden frame for sleeping, a rough wool blanket that scratches at the back of your neck, a single high window, barely wide enough to admit a hand, lets in a pale column of morning light that falls across the floor in a narrow stripe. You watch it. It shifts slightly as the sun climbs. In here, that is how you know what hour it is. You are not alone. You have never been alone since they brought you to this place. There are perhaps a dozen men in your block, some from the wars in the East, some bought off auction platforms in the Forum, one or two who arrived under circumstances no one discusses. You share a courtyard with another block of similar men. You eat together, train together, sleep within earshot of each other's nightmares. There is a particular kind of closeness that comes from this, a closeness that is not exactly friendship, but is not nothing either. You sit up. The straw shifts beneath you. Your left shoulder, the one that took a fall 2 weeks ago during a weapons drill, registers its familiar complaint. Not sharp, not alarming, just present. A low reminder that the body keeps its own record. You press 2 fingers against the joint and the discomfort pulses dully beneath them, then settles. The physician looked at it and said, the bone was sound. You believed him mostly. You have reason to believe him. They do not let injuries fester here, not because they are kind, but because a ruined fighter is a wasted investment. That distinction matters. You have learned to understand it clearly. The morning bell sounds from the direction of the main courtyard, a short flat strike of metal against metal. It does not ring. It does not toll. It strikes once, hard and done, and that is enough. Around you, men begin to move. There is no groaning, no dramatic resistance to waking. The men here have been here long enough that their bodies have surrendered to the rhythm entirely. They rise the way animals rise, immediately, without the slow human theater of reluctance. You rise with them. Outside, the sky is the color of pale ash. The courtyard of the Ludus is already occupied by the early light and by the shadows of the surrounding walls, which are high and smooth and cut the courtyard into sections of sun and shade. A few men crouch near the water trough along the eastern wall, washing their faces and necks. The water is cold at this hour, cold enough that you breathe in sharply through your teeth when you first lower your hands into it. You splash water across your face, hold it there for a moment, feel the chill move through you like a key turning in a lock. The training ground occupies most of the open courtyard. There are wooden posts set into the earth at various heights. The palace, they are called. And you have spent more hours facing one of these posts than you care to count. It is unglamorous work, striking a post. There is no opponent to read, no movement to anticipate, only the repetition of the same movements until they stop being movements and start being something more like instinct. Thrust, guard, pivot. Thrust, guard, pivot. You have done it in the rain. You have done it with bruised hands. You have done it when the morning air was cold enough to see your own breath. The wooden weapons are heavier than the real ones. That is deliberate. You know this now, though it surprised you at first, that the sword you trained with was a thick, blunt parody of a real blade, designed not to wound, but to exhaust. The shield, too, oversized, cumbersome, built to work every muscle in your arm and back until the real thing, when you finally hold it, feels almost light. Almost. The instructors tell you this is wisdom. You have come to think they are right, though arriving at that conclusion, cost you several weeks of burning muscles and a deep, sustained humility. One of the instructors crosses the courtyard now, moving with the particular unhurried authority of someone who has nowhere to be and everyone to answer to. He is a former fighter. They all are. You can see the history of it in the way he holds his body, in the slight asymmetry of his stance where an old injury has quietly reorganized his weight. He does not speak when he passes you. He gives a short nod, the kind that acknowledges presence without invitation. You return it. That is the language of this place. Economical, rarely warm, never unkind without reason. Before the main training begins, there is food. This too follows a pattern so fixed it has become almost ceremonial. You file into the eating area at the edge of the courtyard, a covered space with low benches and long tables, and the morning meal is distributed without ceremony. Porridge, thick and heavy, made mostly from barley. Beans, cooked soft, seasoned with very little. Sometimes there is olive oil in a small clay vessel passed down the table. You use it sparingly because it is not always available. You eat without conversation at this hour, partly from custom, partly because there is something in the quality of this morning silence that the men here seem, without discussion, to protect. You eat slowly. You have learned this too, that eating slowly, chewing thoroughly is not indulgence but strategy. The body performs differently on this food depending on how you take it in. You have noticed this with the particular attention of someone who has very few variables left to control. The food is plain and deliberate, not designed to please but to sustain. And there is something in that plainness that you have come to find, if not comforting, then at least honest. Across the table, one of the younger men, arrived only a month ago, still carrying the look of someone who has not yet fully grasped where he is, pushes his bowl toward the center of the table without finishing it. No one comments. Someone else's hand moves it back in front of him. A quiet insistence. You do not look up, but you register it. This too is part of the code of this place. You eat what is given. Not as submission exactly, but as understanding. What the body needs and what the body wants are not the same thing here. Outside, the sky has lightened to the color of white bone. Somewhere beyond the high walls of the ludus, the city has begun its morning. You can hear it, faintly. The roll of cartwheels over stone, voices at a distance, the sound of something being hammered in a workshop you will never see. Rome is enormous. You know this, though you have seen very little of it. The walls of the school are not quite a prison, but they are definite. They define the world. You move within them, and you learn their logic, and sometimes in the early morning quiet before training begins, you let yourself simply hear the sound of the city outside and feel, without pursuing the feeling too far, the particular distance between yourself and it. The instructor calls the courtyard to order. The sound of his voice carries the same flat authority as the bell that woke you. It does not invite argument. Men rise from the benches, set down bowls, move toward the training ground. You wipe your hands on the rough cloth at the edge of the table, stand, feel the left shoulder register its small protest as you straighten fully, and then walk out into the growing light. The palace casts a long shadow in the early sun. You take your position in front of it. The wooden sword is waiting on its rack beside the post, and you close your hand around the grip, feeling the familiar density of it, the deliberate weight. And you face the post the way you face all the things in this life that do not move, do not speak, and do not yield. You begin. The morning deepens around you as the work begins in earnest. The wooden sword moves through the same sequences you have rehearsed until they live in your tendons rather than your mind. A low guard, a step forward, the controlled drive of the thrust into the post center. The impact travels up through your wrist and into the shoulder, and the shoulder makes its now familiar objection, a brief, tight complaint that you absorb without breaking rhythm. You have learned to distinguish between the pain that signals damage and the pain that signals effort. This is the second kind. You keep moving. The courtyard fills with the sounds of the morning drill, the rhythmic thud of wood on wood, the scuff of feet adjusting on packed earth, the occasional sharp correction from an instructor who has spotted a dropped elbow or an unprotected line. There is no music here, no ceremony. The sound is entirely functional. It is the sound of bodies being shaped toward a specific purpose, and it carries in the cool air with a clarity that feels almost industrial. You are training in the style they assigned you during your first weeks here. Not every man in this courtyard fights the same way, and the differences are not superficial. The fighter 2 posts down from you carries a different weapon entirely, longer, curved, and his footwork describes a different geometry than yours. You have watched him for months now, and you understand that he is learning a different argument, one that the arena will one day set against an argument like yours. The instructors move between you with the knowledge of men who have spent long years studying these contrasts. They understand the mathematics of it, which styles create tension against which others, which confrontations produce the kind of spectacle the crowds come to see. You are not unaware of this. You train within it. By mid-morning, the sun has climbed high enough to clear the eastern wall and lay itself flat across the courtyard. The temperature shifts. What was cool becomes warm, and then, as you continue to work, becomes something that accumulates in the back of your throat and behind your eyes. Sweat has soaked through the cloth wrapped at your waist and darkened the back of your neck. You breathe in a steady, deliberate pattern, through the nose, out through the mouth, the way you were taught, the way that makes the breath a tool rather than a panic. A senior instructor stops near you mid-drill. He says nothing immediately. He watches the angle of your rear foot, the way your weight distributes as you recover from the thrust. Then he steps forward and places one hand on your hip, repositioning you by perhaps 2 finger widths. It is not a correction that involves explanation. It is physical and precise, the way a craftsman adjusts a tool. You hold the new position and feel the difference. A marginal shift in stability, a slight change in what your back leg is doing beneath you. You file it away. These small adjustments accumulate over months into something measurable, and you have learned to receive them without pride or resentment. He moves on without comment. That too is a kind of language here. There is a water break around the middle of the morning. The men gather near the trough, not loosely or lazily, but with the quiet efficiency of people who understand that rest is also a discipline. You drink deeply, more than feels natural, more than thirst alone would demand, because you were told early on that the body's signal for thirst arrives late, that by the time you want water, you already needed it some time ago. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, and for a moment you simply stand, feeling your heartbeat in your neck and temples, feeling the weight of the wooden sword still in your grip, without being fully aware that you have not set it down. Near the wall, 2 men have begun a sparring sequence under the watch of an instructor. This is the next stage of the morning, controlled combat practice, 2 men working against each other rather than against the post. It is a different kind of attention. Against the post there is only repetition. Against a man there is reading, the slight lean of the shoulders before a shift in direction, the minute change in grip pressure that telegraphs a strike. You have spent months learning to see these signals and to suppress your own. It is in its way a study of deception, not dramatic deception, not performance, but the quiet discipline of making your body reveal as little as possible while still moving with full intent. When your turn comes to spar, your partner is a man you have trained beside for most of your time here. He is older than you by perhaps a decade, with a compact, efficient style that has no wasted movement in it. You have faced him many times, and you have never once been able to fully predict him. He gives you a short nod before you begin. Acknowledgement, preparation, something in between. And then you are both moving. The session is not a fight. The instructors are clear about this distinction and enforce it without ambiguity. The weapons are wooden, the strikes are controlled, the purpose is technique, not damage. And yet the body does not entirely believe this, and that tension, the gap between the controlled reality and the instinct that reads any incoming strike as threat, is part of what you are training. The ability to remain technical under pressure, the ability to think while your body is in motion, while a weapon is coming toward you, while the ground shifts under your weight. He catches you on the outside of your knee with a redirected thrust, not hard but precise in exactly the gap your guard left open, and you feel the impact register and absorb into your leg as you step back and reset. He does not pause. He adjusts his angle and comes again. You move your shield earlier this time, tighten the line, and the next exchange goes differently. Neither of you speaks. The instructor watching says nothing either. The only commentary is the positions you take, the responses you offer. the openings you expose and the ones you close. Afterward, standing at the water trough again, the man you were sparring with says, without looking at you directly, that your left side opens when you initiate. He says it quietly, with no particular emphasis, and then drinks from the trough and walks away. You stand with that observation for a moment, turning it over. It is not a taunt. It is the currency of this place. Information offered in exchange for information. Skill given back in the form of honest observation. You think about the shoulder, about whether the lingering discomfort has been causing you to compensate without knowing it. The possibility settles in you like a stone dropping into still water. The afternoon brings different work. The morning is for weapons. The afternoon moves between exercise, equipment maintenance, and the kind of muscular conditioning that does not resemble fighting at all. Lifting, carrying, working the body against its own resistance. There is a section of the afternoon given to the maintenance of armor and equipment, to learning the properties of the materials you fight with, to understanding how weight distributes across a shield, how the edge of a blade behaves against different surfaces, how straps and buckles fail, and how to prevent that failure before it becomes catastrophic. This is not glamorous knowledge. It is essential. You spend part of the afternoon working on a section of leather strap that has begun to soften in a place where sweat has been working into it for months. The physician's assistant, a wiry man who speaks little and observes everything, passes through the equipment area and pauses to look at what you're doing. He does not comment on the strap. He looks instead at the shoulder, at the slight forward roll you don't entirely notice you're doing. He asks you to raise your arm. You do. He presses 2 fingers just below the joint, and you feel a sharper ping of sensation than you were expecting, and you control your face very carefully so that it shows nothing. He nods once, says he will give you something to work into the muscle before sleep, and continues on his way. You lower the arm and return to the strap. The ludus has its own physician, a Greek, most of the men believe, based on the character of his Latin and the particular precision with which he speaks about the body. He treats wounds and manages recoveries with a thoroughness that would seem misplaced if you did not understand by now that it is economic before it is compassionate. You are worth something. Keeping you intact is a practical matter, and yet the care is real care, whatever its origin, and you have seen men brought back from injuries that should have ended them. You have seen the physician sit with a man through a fever, adjusting the treatment through the night. Whatever his motives, his competence is not in doubt. In the late afternoon, the light changes. It comes in low and sideways, cutting through the gaps in the western wall in long horizontal bands that fall across the courtyard in warm, nearly amber strips. The training is done for the day, and men move through the space with the looser, quieter energy of a day concluding. Some gather in small clusters near the wall, speaking in the low, horizontal tones of men with nowhere they need to be for an hour. Some sit alone. There is a man who carves, a small bone tool he works on whenever the day gives him time, and you can sometimes hear the quiet scraping of it in the evening quiet. You sit on the low step outside your block and let the late sun reach your face. It is warm in a way that is purely physical, with no social meaning attached to it. The sun does not distinguish between the free man walking in the forum and the fighter sitting inside the walls of a training school. For a moment that distinction feels, if not irrelevant, then at least temporarily suspended. You are aware of it as a feeling, not a conclusion. You do not follow it into the territory of what it might mean, because that territory is large and the hour is small, and you have learned the discipline of not thinking too far ahead in a life that rewards present attention. From beyond the wall, the city continues its indifferent noise, a vendor's voice, distant but animated, selling something you cannot identify. Somewhere, a child running on stone. Wheels, a bell from a temple, slower and more resonant than the bell that governs your mornings. You listen to it fade. You press the heel of your hand gently against the left shoulder. The muscle beneath it is tight and deep, and it aches in the specific, structural way of something that has been asked to do more than it was ready for. You keep your hand there for a moment, feeling your own pulse in your palm. The evening meal will come soon. After that, the night. After that, the bell. The evening meal arrives with the same wordless reliability as everything else in this place. The light has gone copper and then grey by the time the food is brought out, and the men settle onto the benches with the particular heaviness of bodies that have spent themselves honestly through the day. There is more barley, there are lentils cooked down into something dense and filling, and tonight there is a small portion of salted fish distributed along the table. Not enough to constitute generosity, but enough to mark the evening meal as distinct from the morning one. You eat with attention. The salt of the fish sits on your tongue in a way that is briefly, unexpectedly pleasurable, and you allow yourself that small thing without examination. The conversation at the evening table is different from the silence of the morning. It is not loud. It is never loud here in a way that draws attention. But it has texture. Men speak in their various languages, and the Latin that bridges them. There are men here from across the Empire's reach, from places you have only heard named and never seen, and the diversity of their faces and their speech has long since ceased to be remarkable. What remains remarkable, quietly and persistently, is the degree to which shared circumstance produces shared understanding across those distances. A man does not need to speak your language to communicate exhaustion or dry humor, or the particular satisfaction of a day's work concluded without incident. Across the table from you, a man named Drusus, who has been here longer than almost anyone in your block, who carries the particular authority of someone who has survived what others have only imagined, is speaking in a low voice to the man beside him. You catch fragments. He is describing a fight from years ago, not with drama but with the precise technical recall of a craftsman reviewing a job. A mistake in footing, a correction made mid-movement, the weight of the outcome. His listener nods occasionally. You do not look directly at them, but you listen, because listening to men like Drusus is one of the better educations available in this place. He fought in the arena many times. You know this because the evidence is written on him in the language of old scar tissue. Across the left forearm, along the collarbone, a small drawn depression near the ribs, where something once went deeper than it should have. He does not speak of these marks as a record of suffering. He speaks of each fight the way he speaks of each drill, as a problem that was presented and a solution that was found, or nearly found, or found at cost. His survival is in this building a form of instruction. After the meal, the evening hour is loosely held. There is no formal obligation until the night bell closes the blocks. Men use this time in ways that say something about who they were before this place and who they are becoming inside it. The man who carves continues his work, holding the small bone piece close to the fading light. Two men play a game with pebbles and lines scratched into the dirt near the wall, a game you do not know the rules of but have watched enough times to have a partial understanding of its logic. Someone is sleeping already, face turned toward the wall, shoulders rising and falling in the deep rhythm of genuine exhaustion. You sit with the shoulder again, pressing carefully into the muscle with your fingers, working the tightness in slow circles the way the physician's assistant showed you. The oil he gave you smells of something sharp and herbal. You do not know what it is and you have not asked, and it warms slightly against the skin as you work it in. The discomfort does not resolve, but it shifts, becoming less dense, more diffuse, which is apparently the best available outcome for tonight. You work through it methodically without impatience. Impatience in here is a luxury that does not pay for itself. A sound from the far end of the courtyard draws your attention briefly. One of the younger men has knocked over a water vessel in the dimness, and the sound of it, the hollow clatter against stone, causes several heads to turn with an alertness that is entirely instinctual. The vessel rocks and settles. The young man crouches to right it, glancing around with the specific expression of someone hoping not to have been seen. The heads turn back. The evening resumes. You notice your own pulse had accelerated briefly, without decision, before the cause of the sound became clear. The body here is always a step ahead of the mind, always reading the environment for signals before you have consciously committed to reading it. You have stopped trying to change this. It is, you have come to believe, not a defect. The night closes in slowly. The stars, where visible above the narrow rectangle of sky the courtyard admits, are sharp and numerous. The city sounds diminish, not into silence. Rome never fully silences itself, but into a lower register. The heavy commerce of daytime gives way to the occasional voice, the distant sound of something breaking somewhere, the strange, hollow echo of footsteps on stone in an empty street. You lie on your back after the night bell closes the block, looking at the high window and the small portion of sky it frames. The wool blanket is scratchy at the jaw. Sleep comes eventually in the way it always comes here, without announcement, swallowing the thread of thought mid-course. The days accumulate. This is a thing no one tells you and that you discover for yourself, that time inside the ludus does not pass the way time passes outside it. Outside, time is marked by events, by change, by the irregular rhythm of a life that shifts according to the pressure of weather and fortune and relationship. Inside, time is marked by repetition. Day after day, the bell sounds at the same hour, the food arrives in the same sequence, the body is taken through the same demands. And yet the repetition is not stagnation. Something is changing within it, below the surface of the routine, in the deeper tissues where the work is actually being done. You are different from the person who arrived here. You know this not through reflection. You rarely indulge in that kind of direct self-examination, but through the evidence of the body. Your hands are changed, thicker at the base of the fingers, roughened across the palm in the specific places where the grip of the weapon falls. Your back is different. Your legs. The shoulder that troubled you has quieted, in the way an argument quiets when both sides have finally been heard. Not resolved exactly, but integrated. You move differently, you see differently. When you look at a man now, your eyes go first to his stance, his weight distribution, the geometry of his body relative to yours. This is not something you decided to do, it is what months of this work produces. The social life of the ludus is narrow but not shallow. You know the men around you in the way that shared confinement and shared physical risk produces knowledge, a knowledge less of background and history than of character under pressure. You know who accelerates under difficulty and who hesitates. You know who is generous with his observations and who keeps his knowledge close. You know who sleeps badly and who sleeps without apparent conscience. These things matter here in ways they might not matter elsewhere. Your life, in a functional sense, depends partly on the quality of the training you receive, and the training you receive comes significantly from these men. There is one among them, a fighter from somewhere in the eastern provinces, a man of few words and extraordinarily efficient movement, who has taken to walking the perimeter of the courtyard in the late evenings, before the night bell. He does it every night, the same circuit at the same measured pace, with an expression of such complete interior absorption that you have never once seen anyone interrupt him. You do not know what he thinks about during these walks. You have wondered occasionally in the private space of your own thoughts, where such wondering is permissible, whether he is planning, whether he is remembering, whether he is doing something more essential than either simply being present in his own body in motion, in the narrow strip of sky above the walls. There is a morning some weeks into the season when the lanistae comes to watch the training. His presence changes the quality of the air in the courtyard, not because he announces himself, but because the instructors register him first, with a subtle shift in posture. And the men read this shift and register him second. He stands at the edge of the training ground with the particular stillness of a man who is calculating. This is what he does when he watches. He calculates. His eye moves across the bodies in front of him with an attention that is entirely economic, assessing condition, development, potential, risk. You know this. You have always known this. And yet there is something in being the object of that gaze that produces a sensation you would not easily name. Not exactly humiliation, not exactly anger, something older and more complicated that you have learned to let sit in your chest without pursuing it. He speaks privately with the senior instructor for several minutes. You cannot hear the words, you do not try. When he leaves, the training resumes with the same pace it had before, and nothing is said by anyone. But later that afternoon, one of the instructors tells two men, not you, the two men beside you, that they will be fighting in the next games. He says it the way he says most things, directly, without decoration. The men receive the information with expressions that give very little away. You watch them briefly and without appearing to watch them for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, the two men sit together at the far end of the table, slightly separated from the rest by an invisible but mutually observed margin. They eat. They speak quietly. Their faces are calm in the way that faces are calm when the emotion behind them is too large to express through expression. You understand this. You eat your own meal and you do not look at them directly because you know what they are doing. The quiet interior accounting that comes when the abstract becomes suddenly irrevocably concrete, and it seems right to give them the undisturbed space in which to do it. Drusus across the table eats without looking up. He has been through this many times from both sides of the moment. He knows what these evenings feel like. His silence toward the two men has a quality of respect in it, not the respect of sympathy exactly, but of recognition. He knows what is being done internally at the end of that table, and he offers it room. You think about your own name being called one day. You have thought about it before in the abstract, in the early weeks when it was still a theoretical consideration. Now, watching the two men, it is less abstract. The thought does not arrive with panic. It arrives with a kind of settling weight, like the wooden sword in your hand, familiar, heavy, present. You hold it for a moment, the way you hold the sword, with attention, with a grip that is firm but not rigid. Then you take another spoonful of lentils. The salt of the evening fish is still faintly on your tongue. The stars above the courtyard are beginning to appear in the dark strip of sky overhead, small and cold and entirely indifferent to what happens beneath them. The man who carves is working on his piece near the wall. The scraping sound is slow and even, unhurried. You listen to it as you finish your meal. There is something in that sound, the patient, repeated removal of material toward a form that exists so far only in intention, that you find in this moment, and without entirely knowing why, oddly steadying. The games are announced through the city, in the way that all large events are announced in Rome, by voice and by presence, by the painted notices that appear on walls throughout the districts, by the particular electricity that moves through the population in the days preceding them. Inside the ludus, you know the games are coming before any official word arrives, because the training changes. The tempo shifts, the instructors press harder, the sparring sessions grow longer, and the corrections sharper, and there is a new quality of attention in the courtyard, a fine-grained alertness that was not absent before, but now sits closer to the surface of everything. The two men who were told they would fight have been training with a focused intensity that the rest of the school observes without comment. You watch the change in them across the days, not a change in personality exactly, but a kind of narrowing. The peripheral concerns of daily life, the small social negotiations, the evening conversations, the easy physical humor that passes between men in proximity, all of this recedes in them, and what remains is purely functional. They eat deliberately. They sleep when they can. They train with a concentration so complete that watching them feels, at moments, like an intrusion. You have your own training to attend to, and you give it your full attention. But the awareness of what is coming, not for you, not yet, but present in the building, in the changed atmosphere of the courtyard, sharpens something in your own work. The post receives your strikes with the same indifference it always has, but you find yourself inside the sequences differently, more awake to the small errors and corrections, more honest in your assessment of where the gaps in your technique still live. The left side, as the man told you after sparring weeks ago. You work on it with a patience that is itself a form of discipline. On the morning the fighters are to be taken to the holding area near the arena, the ludus wakes to a different quality of silence. It is not the ordinary silence of early morning, which is merely the silence of sleep not yet fully surrendered. This silence has a texture of awareness in it, as though the building itself is awake before its occupants. You lie in the grey pre-dawn light and listen to it for a moment before rising, and in that moment, something in you registers the day as distinct, without being able to articulate precisely why. The body knows before the mind does, always. The meal that morning is eaten with an attention close to ceremony. The two men eat at the same place they always eat, doing nothing that is in any way theatrical, but the table around them is quieter than usual, and the quiet has the quality of a kind of acknowledgement, an unspoken collective recognition of what this morning is. Drusus eats with his eyes down. The man who carves sets his piece aside and eats with both hands on the table. Small adjustments, small offerings of presence. You eat your barley and you are aware of the warmth of the man on your left and the man on your right, the solidity of their proximity, in a way you do not always register consciously. When the time comes, The two fighters leave the courtyard with their equipment and their escorts in a manner that is entirely without spectacle. They walk. They carry what they need. One of them glances back once at the men watching from the courtyard. Not a dramatic look, not a farewell of any particular weight, just the ordinary human reflex of checking what is behind you before you move forward. Then they are gone through the gate, and the gate closes, and the courtyard resumes. The training continues. This is the logic of this place, and it is a logic you have come to understand deeply. The work does not pause for emotion. The work is partly the point of the emotion. It takes what the body and mind accumulate and converts it into the only currency that matters here, which is capability. You return to the post. The wooden sword is in your hand. The morning light is on the stone. Several days pass before word returns about the fights. It comes in the way news usually comes into the ludus, indirectly, in fragments, carried in the mouths of the guards and staff, who move between the building and the wider city. You piece it together from these fragments the way you piece together most things here, patiently, without urgency, letting the full shape of it assemble over time. Both men survived. One fought well by all accounts and received the acknowledgement of the crowd. The other was injured, a cut along the thigh, significant but not mortal, and was taken to the medical area to be treated. When they return to the ludus, the reception is quiet and genuine. Not celebration exactly. The register here does not run to celebration, but a warmth of acknowledgement that you have come to understand is the deepest form of welcome this place offers. Men clap shoulders. Drusus speaks privately with the injured man for a long time, his voice low and even. You do not hear what is said. You do not need to. The injured man is kept from training while the thigh heals. The physician visits him twice a day, with a regularity that speaks to the seriousness of the wound beneath the composed surface of the man's expression. You see him in the evenings, sitting outside his block in the late light, the leg extended before him, his face carrying the particular blankness of someone managing a quantity of discomfort that requires active management. Once, passing near him, you meet his eyes briefly. He gives you the same short nod the instructors use, acknowledgement without invitation, presence without demand. You return it and continue walking. The man who fought well and came back whole has returned to training with a changed quality. Something in him has settled. The abstraction of the arena, which for those who have not yet been there exists as a kind of theoretical space, imagined but not known, has been replaced in him by actual knowledge, and the replacement shows. His movements have a new economy. His eyes in sparring have a different depth. He is not arrogant. Arrogance is not what this is. It is more like the specific confidence of someone who has encountered the thing they were being prepared for and has discovered that the preparation was, in the ways that mattered, sufficient. You watch him and you absorb what you can. The seasons move through the ludus in the way they move through any enclosed space, felt through the body, before they are visible in the sky. The summer heat arrives first as a heaviness in the afternoon training sessions, a quality of the air that thickens and presses. The courtyard in high summer becomes a different place. The stone radiates what it has absorbed through the day. The shade retreats to narrow strips along the walls. The water in the trough is warm by mid-morning. Training adapts. The hardest work is moved to the early hours, when the air still carries the memory of night, and the afternoon becomes a time of recovery and maintenance rather than maximum output. You sweat through the summer months in a way that feels almost geological, a deep, continuous seeping that is less the sweat of exertion than the sweat of sustained thermal existence. Your body learns to manage it. You drink water with a regularity that has become entirely automatic, reading your own physical state with the by-now practiced attention of someone who understands that dehydration is not merely uncomfortable, but tactically dangerous. You eat the barley and the beans through the heat with no appetite for them, which is irrelevant. Appetite is not the point of eating here, and you have long since separated the two. The city beyond the walls behaves differently in summer. You can hear it. The quality of the noise changes, more voices at odd hours, the sounds of activity extending later into the evening and beginning earlier in the morning, as though the population is working around the worst of the heat. From the high window in your sleeping area, You can occasionally smell the city's summer self, warmer, more pungent, the odors of animals and refuse and cooking and human density, all amplified by the heat in ways the cooler months mercifully suppress. It is not a pleasant smell. It is, however, a real one, and it reminds you that beyond the walls there is a city living its life in the same sun. In the cooling of the autumn, the pace of the Ludus accelerates again. More fighters are told they will participate in the coming games, a larger event than the one that took the two men earlier in the year. Your name is not among the first called. You do not know what this means or whether it means anything beyond the simple mathematics of scheduling and the lanistae's calculations. You train with the same attention you have brought to every morning. But on an afternoon in the middle of that preparation period, the senior instructor stops your sparring session and speaks with you privately at the edge of the courtyard. He tells you that you will fight before the year ends. He says it in the same tone in which he delivers all information, flat, direct, carrying no particular emotional weight of its own, as though the weight of the information is your business rather than his. He waits for your response. You give him a nod. He studies your face for a moment with the experienced eye of someone who can read what faces are doing beneath what they are showing. Then he nods in return and walks away. You stand for a moment at the edge of the courtyard. The afternoon light falls across the stone in long, pale rectangles. The sounds of the other men training continue behind you. The thud of wood, the scuff of feet, a short grunt of effort, and the low, immediate voice of an instructor redirecting someone's guard. All of it entirely ordinary. The day entirely ordinary. You in it, with this new, concrete thing sitting now in the center of your chest where before it was only potential. You notice that your grip on the wooden sword has tightened without your intending it. You look at your hand for a moment, the knuckles whitened slightly around the grip, and you make a deliberate effort to soften the hold. Not to release it, just to hold it correctly, firm without rigidity, the way you were taught from the beginning. You turn back to the courtyard and you return to work. The evening comes in its usual way. The food arrives, the men eat. The stars appear in the strip of sky above the walls, cold and numerous. The man who carves works on his piece near the wall, and the slow, patient sound of it moves through the quiet like something almost musical, the sound of material being shaped, gradually and with great care, toward a form that has not yet fully revealed itself. You sit with the oil on your shoulder, and you listen to that sound, and the night closes around the ludus in the slow, indifferent way it closes around everything in this city. The temples and the forums, and the wide, crowded streets, and the small enclosed courtyard where men are made ready for something that the rest of the world comes to watch, and you alone must enter. The morning of the games arrives the way all significant mornings arrive, indistinguishable at first from any other. The bell sounds. The light comes through the high window in its narrow column. The man down the wall is coughing in his slow, rhythmic way. You lie still for the few seconds you always allow yourself, feeling the wool blanket at your jaw, feeling the particular weight of your own body against the wooden frame. Then you rise. The difference announces itself in small ways. The equipment laid out the previous evening, real equipment, not the wooden training weight of daily practice, catches what little light the room admits and returns it differently. The metal has a quality that wood does not. It sits in the corner of the cell with a kind of material honesty, neither threatening nor reassuring, simply present in its actual nature. You dress, and you do not look at it for longer than necessary. There is nothing to be gained from extended contemplation of it at this hour. The body needs food and water and movement. You give it those things first. The morning meal is eaten in a silence that is different from the usual morning silence, though you would struggle to say precisely how. The food is the same. The table is the same. The men sitting along it are the same men. And yet the silence has a density to it, a shared awareness that sits above the benches like a second atmosphere. You eat your barley, you eat it slowly, you taste the salt in it and the slight bitterness at the edge that you have never been able to identify and have long since stopped trying to. You drink water until the water feels like enough. Drusus is at the far end of the table. He eats without looking up. At some point during the meal, without ceremony, he slides a small piece of folded cloth down the table in your direction. You open it. Inside is a thin cord, braided from what appears to be several strands of different materials wound together with considerable care. You look at it for a moment, then at him. He has returned his attention to his food. You close your hand around the cord and say nothing. That is the right response, and you both know it. The procession to the arena moves through streets that are already awake and animated with the specific energy of a games day. You walk with the other fighters and your escorts through the morning crowds, and the city receives you in the contradictory way it always receives men like you, with a gaze that is simultaneously fascinated and dismissive, that looks at you as spectacle before it looks at you as person. You have been told about this. Nothing fully prepares you for it. The faces along the route carry expressions that range from open excitement to a kind of hungry appraisal, and you move through them with your eyes forward and your jaw set in a neutral line, feeling their attention on your skin like a change in temperature. The Colosseum, when it comes into full view, is a fact of scale that resists description. You have seen it from the outside before, in fragments, through gaps in walls and from the edges of streets. But full and close, it is something else entirely. A construction so large that it seems less like a building than like a feature of the terrain, as though the ground simply rose in this place into tiers of stone. The sounds coming from inside it, even now, with the morning still young and the crowd still assembling, have a resonance that you feel in your chest before you hear it distinctly with your ears. You are taken beneath it, into the network of corridors and holding areas that occupy the ground level and the spaces below it. Here, the noise of the crowd above is transmitted through the stone as a kind of sustained, low vibration, and the air smells of animals and damp rock and torch smoke. Other fighters are already here, some from other schools, some that you know by reputation if not by face. You look at them, and they look at you with the specific assessment of men who share a profession that does not permit many illusions. It is not hostility. It is something closer to the frank mutual recognition of people who understand, without discussion, what this day requires. You wait. This is the part that no training fully addresses, the waiting. The body is prepared, the technique is present, the mind has been brought as close to functional clarity as months of work can bring it. But the waiting has its own demands. Time in the holding area moves differently than time in the ludus. It is thick and irregular, stretching at some moments and compressing at others, and the sounds from above shift in volume and character as the morning progresses and the crowds fill the tiers. You sit with your back against the cool stone wall, and you keep your breathing even, and you turn the braided cord around your fingers without thinking about it consciously. At some point the man beside you, from another school unknown to you until this morning, says something quietly in a Latin that carries the accent of somewhere far to the north. You do not catch all of it. He seems to understand this and does not repeat it, but he looks at you with a brief expression of something uncomplicated and human, a kind of acknowledgement, almost wry, that needs no translation. You find, to your mild surprise, that it helps. The small humanness of it. The reminder that alongside all the architecture of this day, its scale, its calculation, its enormous indifference, there are still two men sitting against a wall in the dark, waiting, like men have always waited before difficult things. What happens in the arena itself, you will carry in a form that does not easily convert to language. Not because it is beyond language, men have described it before, many times, but because what you carry is not primarily a narrative. It is sensory and physical and immediate in a way that resists the sequential order that language requires. There is the light, first, the enormous, unmediated light of an open sky after the dimness of the corridors below, a light so total and undifferentiated that for a moment it is nearly all there is. There is the sound which is not so much sound as pressure, a wall of human noise that hits you at the threshold of the arena entrance and does not relent. There is the sand beneath your feet, which is coarser than you expected and very real. There is the weight of the real shield on your arm, and you understand now completely what the months of the heavier training version were for, because the real shield in this moment does feel lighter, feels like an extension of your arm rather than a burden on it, and this technical gift from your past self to your present one produces a feeling that is almost gratitude. There is the smell of the crowd, tens of thousands of people in a stone bowl under a full sun, which is its own overwhelming fact. And then there is your opponent. Across the sand at the distance, the arena establishes between you a man, also trained, also prepared, also present in this moment with the full weight of his own months and years and fears and capability. You look at him the way you have been trained to look, not at the face, not at the weapon, but at the whole configuration of the body, the geometry of his stance, the weight distribution. He looks back at you in the same way. For a moment, before the signal, there is a strange and genuine stillness between you that the roar of the crowd does not touch. The fight, when it comes, is not what the crowd sees. What the crowd sees is spectacle, movement and clash, and the dramatic grammar of combat made visible at scale. What you experience is much smaller and much larger than that simultaneously. It is entirely present tense. There is no crowd in it, no architecture, no calculation of outcome. There is the incoming angle of a strike and the decision that meets it. There is the ground under your feet and the weight of the shield and the line of your own guard, and the specific reading of a man who is trying, with genuine and skilled intent, to find the gap in your defense before you find the gap in his. Your left side, you remember. You hold the line. There is a moment, one moment mid-exchange, when you feel something you were not prepared for, which is a species of clarity so complete it is almost restful. Not calm, not the absence of urgency, but something underneath the urgency that is perfectly still. The months of repetition have produced this, the thousands of strikes against the post, the uncountable corrections, the mornings of barley and cold water, and the smell of damp stone. All of it has been building toward the capacity to be, in this moment, entirely here, entirely functional, entirely yourself in the only sense that currently matters. The fight ends the way it ends. You are standing when it does. The walk back through the arena's underbelly is different from the walk in. The stone corridors are the same stone, the torch smoke the same smoke. But you move through them differently, not with triumph, which is not what this is, but with the quiet, somewhat stunned quality of someone who has crossed a threshold and is still in the first moments of understanding what is on the other side of it. The noise of the crowd above has changed tone, moved on to other things, as crowds do. The enormous machine of the games continues without pause, indifferent to the particular outcome of any individual contest within it. In the medical area beneath the arena, a physician checks you with brisk, thorough hands. He notes a cut along the forearm. You are not fully aware of it during the fight, though you must have registered it somewhere, and he cleans it and binds it with the same economic competence with which everything medical is done in this world. It is not deep. It will close. He tells you to keep it dry for several days and moves on to the next man. You sit with the bound arm in the dimness and you breathe. Back in the ludus, the evening is quiet. The reception from the men is what you know by now to expect. Subdued, genuine, a warmth expressed through proximity rather than speech. Drusus looks at you across the table with an expression that contains more than it displays, which is his way, which is the way of this place. You eat your evening meal, barley, lentils, a small portion of fish, and the taste of it is unremarkable and entirely sufficient. Later, sitting outside in the last of the day's warmth, you turn the braided cord around your fingers and you look at the strip of sky above the courtyard walls. The stars are beginning to appear in it, faint at first, then more certain, the same cold and numerous points that have been above this courtyard every night you have slept here. The city murmurs beyond the walls in its endless, indifferent way. Somewhere a cart moves over stone. Somewhere a voice rises and falls. Somewhere in a district you have never seen, a child is being put to sleep. You think about the man across the sand this morning, his stance, his weight, the moment of stillness before the signal. You think about him without hostility or drama. He was doing what you were doing. The arena required a resolution between you and the arena received one, and that is the full extent of what can honestly be said about it. The rest is the crowd's story, not yours. Your story is smaller and more durable. It is the cord in your fingers. It is the cut healing cleanly on your arm. It is the barley eaten in the early light, and the wooden sword lifted again tomorrow, and the bell that will sound before dawn, whether you are ready for it or not. It is the shoulder that has quieted finally into something like acceptance. It is the man who carves his piece of bone near the wall in the evenings, patient and unhurried, working toward a form that emerges only through the sustained application of small repeated effort. It is the way Drusus eats his meal without looking up, carrying his years like a man carries something heavy that he has long since stopped thinking of as heavy. History remembers the arena, the roar, the sand, the spectacle built from the lives of men whose names most of it never knew. What history is slower to remember is the courtyard in the grey morning light, the weight of the wooden sword, the cold water at the trough, the particular silence of men eating before the bell drives them back to work. The ordinary substance of a life lived inside impossible circumstances, not heroically, not without fear, but with the daily, unglamorous commitment to being as capable as possible of whatever comes next. This is what another POV is here to recover, not the monuments but the mournings, not the spectacle but the people inside it. If these perspectives matter to you, stay with us. There are more lives worth inhabiting, more ordinary days inside extraordinary times, and we will keep returning to them together. The bell will sound again tomorrow. You already know what you will do when it does.